Welcome everybody to the first session for the new year. It's great to have you with us, and it looks like we have a really wonderful attendance today. We're already up over 160 folks attending, and surprisingly, I'm actually in the office today in New Jersey, and Lewis is actually in his office as well. Lewis?
Hello everybody. I greet you from Hermitage, Tennessee, high atop my second floor spare bedroom.
Doubling as an office, yes.
Doubling as an office.
Okay, so today we have a guest presenter with us, Scott Tobias. He's an independent hardware consultant working under the banner of arkaSpecs. I've known Scott for quite a long time, and he's out on his own within the past, I think, year and a half, writing door hardware specs as an independent consultant. So, and he's recently authored a book on hardware specifications too. That's available, I think, through Wiley, and if it's not, he'll correct me. He might even be so good as to give you the title if he's.
It's on the last slide, and okay. It's available actually through Amazon also.
Okay, so with that, Scott, you're going to teach us everything that we need to know about working with a door hardware consultant today. Those kinds of information that you hope everybody brings to you, and the kinds of information that you will share back to make the projects perfect, right?
That's the plan, David. And Lewis, thanks so much for having me here today. I see a lot of great attendees on the list and a lot of hardware experts as well, so if there's any other feedback out there, please don't hesitate to reach out. So as indicated, I am an independent door hardware specification consultant. We'll talk about some of the services and things, how we might be able to help you later on at the end of the presentation. But let's just jump into the presentation a little. Okay, so just to talk a little bit more about the services again, traditionally you would hire electrical engineers, mechanical engineers, plumbing engineers, so just figuring out that the services that we provide as we talk today, hopefully you'll see the value in time saved and change orders saved and punch lists saved and things that can actually help increase your billable hour time and such. So let's jump into the presentation. Learning objectives for today, even though it's not a credited presentation, so to speak, I like to point out the items we should be focusing in on. So we're going to understand the Door and Hardware Institute standard, and there is a real standard out there called the sequence and format for the hardware schedule to help us specify an optimal door opening. We'll also identify information required, as David said, to help reduce risk for creating door hardware specifications. We'll recognize door opening smooth surface accessibility compliance, which has turned into a really big topic of discussion in my travels in recent months, and decide if a certified architectural hardware consultant or AHC can help reduce your door hardware punch list items and change orders. You might have noticed this image and wondering with door hardware what is a gymnasium with kids doing up on the screen as we opened up. But about a year and a half, 2.5 years ago, my wife and I took in the foster child, Jason, there standing in the middle. And about a year and a half ago, when I changed jobs, I had some time and I was able to go bring him to his gym class and such. And the first thing I'm looking at, like with every other opening I go through, is how do I get out of this space? How do I make sure everybody's safe? How do I make sure we're secure and do what we're supposed to do to keep safety? And especially that little thing there in the corner was catching my eye, and that blocked exits. That's really not safety. That's not something that's going to help us get out of a space. And again, that's really the first thing I look at all the time, never mind having children and being in a room with children of 65 in assembly space and really, needing to know how to do that in case there is an emergency. So the next week I came back and the rooms were on the other side and he brought some friends. So it's a continual habit and I continually remind them, and hopefully it will get better over time. By the way, this is the other side of that door. So even getting the brooms out of the way, we have a bigger problem. So, point being, life safety and security, it is my life, and door hardware, it's really my passion, and I really love helping save lives and being part of the team and doing the best I can. So baby Jason, I mentioned on the left, just to close out the story, after we took him in on March of 2014, we found out he had two older brothers that he was separated from biologically with their mom, Nathan and Anthony, and this is us 2.5 years later, and we're on the road to adoption. So hopefully within the next few months we'll be all official and everything. So what a great pleasure we've had, and it just makes life safety and security even more meaningful to me. So enough about my kids and me. Let's talk a bit about the discussion topics. So today we'll talk about facilities and their project standards. We'll talk about codes. We'll talk about life safety, egress, fire, smoke, and accessibility a little bit, and how the information we need really concisely and complete and correct is very pertinent to help us get to an optimally specified door opening. I mentioned before about change orders and punch lists. It's said that door hardware is about 1.5% of the total value of a project, but it's also been said that it's 85-90% of the punch list. So, it really, if we coordinate properly and really, spend more time than we spend on it today in getting the proper information and working together and collaborating, we really can have a cleaner project and save all those heartaches and headaches. And as David said, root canal in the announcement that we suffer with when it comes down to the end.
Hey, Scott, just curious on the punch list items, is that something that kind of a number, is that coming back from CMs or from contractors, or are you hearing that?
That's exactly where it's coming from.
Number?
In my past year's travels, it's no official reportings and writings, but they are saying that 85% of their problems is door hardware when it comes to their punch list. So security and electronic access control, I can also attest to being a coordination major feat. It's something that has a lot of moving parts, has a lot of people, has a lot of decision makers to it. And again, life safety and security, they conflict with each other. So we really need to figure out how to harness the power of what needs to be done and get it properly the first time so we can avoid any tragedies in the end as well. And any security issues as well. Specialty openings, details, very, very important. We'll go over some major details that are they seem so simple and so little, but they really can make a big costly effect on the door hardware in the end, in those change orders and things that might need to be fixed, come installation time. If we have some time, we'll talk about deliverables and requests for information and substitution requests and how important they are. As well as the submittal review and possibly, installation assessments to just follow through and make sure that what we put on paper from the beginning and work so hard to coordinate is actually, operating and working as we expected in the end. So if we jump into the choices, right? Wow, door hardware is quite overwhelming. It's overwhelming for me, almost 30 years into it, and as David mentioned, writing a book on it took 4 years. Even today, it's continually overwhelming. I searched some resource sites in preparation for this, and some sites are pulling up to 172 door hardware companies. So many choices. What do you specify? Why do you choose what you specify? Where the quality, is it the design, is it the cost, which is most of the time, right? It's the cost and functionality. There's a lot of reasons why, and there's a lot of decision makers, as I said before, why. I'm an expert. I think I'm an expert. I know how doors should function and what function should go on doors, but the architect's the expert, the design team, they know codes, life safety, they know what should go where, but the user's the user, and they may have a certain way of using that door or a certain function they prefer from their experiences, and we really shouldn't guess. We should get their input and coordinate that together. So varying user needs, that attests to that, and the device types and the functionality. Different device grades depends on the frequency of use. You have sagging handles, you have locks put in major high entrances that just shouldn't be there. They should be in back of house or in laundry rooms. And again, because of that cost. So you're saving cost up front, but way down the line, we're going to be replacing that. We're going to be having labor and sustainability, landfills, and more garbage. It's just if we invest and coordinate properly up front, we can really save all those heartaches that we get down the line.
Hey, Scott, of the 172 that you think you may have found, is there a split that you want to guess between, say, commercial hardware companies and those folks doing purely residential?
If I had to say hard, commercial, I'd say somewhere in the 60s to 70s from my, experience, at least those that we'd want to focus on and work with. So it's probably maybe somewhere in the split half, but probably in the end around 70s is what my experience tells me. I've done a lot of research on that.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. A lot of that is residential, but we a lot of residential architects too working on, and there's a lot of customization too with those little companies that you don't normally go to choose or pick. So there's a lot of advantages to researching and working with some of those as well. And then at the bottom here, varying applications, so combinations of components, code restrictions, life safety versus security I mentioned. I mean, it just can become an overwhelming mountain of choices, and we got to muddle through it together to make sure we get it done properly. There is a street format out there that a lot of people follow to make sure they specify properly, maybe writing hardware schedules. And, when I learned it back in the day 30 years ago, we hung it, we locked it, we stopped it, we closed it, and we protected it. But the DHI, Door Hardware Institute, sequence and format actually has 10 sequences to the format. First you hang the door, then you secure it. If you're not securing it, you're operating it with some sort of a push or a pull. Then we accessorize it if it's a pair of doors. We control it with our door closers and overhead stops. Then we stop it. We protect it, accessorize it as a whole, and then there are 2 miscellaneous categories. It's not 100% true, but I categorize them as the first one is more mechanical and the second one more electronic miscellaneous items that just didn't have another place in the sequence. So, I mean, I use this sequence as a checklist. Every door I go to, on the door schedule, I look at the floor plan. If I have to pull up a security drawing, I mean, I'm going step by step, hanging it, securing it, accessorizing it, so on and so forth, to make sure, nothing is missed and that everything fits and that all the dimensions are right, and, operationally it does what it's supposed to do. So I found that this checklist is a great resource. It says hardware schedule, but the hardware schedule comes from the spec, which is the same format, so absolutely can be called the format for the spec. So project coordination meeting. We've got all these choices, right? We've got all these things. We really need to decide how's it going to work. I mentioned before, I'm an expert, you're an expert, but we're not the users. The users may want it their way and no other way. And there's many times we are told to do it that way or whatever way that is. So, I mean, ideally having a project coordination meeting, which we all know is very difficult to do, getting all the decision makers in the room at the same time to make those decisions. The owner team, the design team, and the security team. I mean, these all really affect, the specification and the use of the door and the door opening in the end. Agreeing on operational intent of each opening, literally, I sit in a room with these people and go door by door. How should this door operate? How should this door operate? And we address fire and smoke ratings. And, having this information on your door schedule earlier on is much better than piecemealing it later. And we'll talk a little bit about missing information in a few slides. But complying with stairwell and reentry versus security requirements. There's different cities have different requirements for different levels of reentry, so, coordinating those properly. Fire alarm systems. If we want to hold doors open, we got to coordinate those. So I can guess as to what you want and where you want and how you want it, but, I'm not the user. So getting the user, getting the information, getting everybody in the room is going to help to expedite that, make it more efficient. And, we're all in the room, we agree on it, we put it on paper, and there's our working document. You can read down the list. I don't have to talk about every single one. If there are any questions on any of them, applying, panic hardware to the various requirements, specialty openings. We'll talk a little bit more about elevations and details, and we'll talk about security in a little more detail as well. Any questions on any of this stuff yet, Dave or Lewis?
Well, I was curious what you do with, you mentioned trying to define the operation of each door, but what happens when you have the design team or the security team or one of the other players coming to you and essentially telling you what devices are supposed to be on the door?
Well, that's, them telling you, it depends on if they've been empowered to tell you, really. We got to come down to the root of why we're being told what we're being told, because, if it's their preference or it's their stock item or it's, whatever it is, that's not acceptable to me. I'm going to bring my comments and my, opinions to the architect, who hopefully is relaying them to the owner, who is hiring everybody and is going to probably make that final decision. But it can be, it's a job by job, there's no blanket answer for that, but it's a challenge every project we work on. So facility standards, manufacturers, keying, and security. Another big important piece of the puzzle, right? It depends on where we start. I talked about manufacturer's choices before. We talked about security before. So, all these devices need to talk and work with each other. As David just mentioned, if I'm told this device has to work and this is what we need to use, well, maybe it's not a facility standard. Maybe it doesn't fit their keying schedule. Maybe it doesn't fit, their type of opening or their styles or their door dimensions. So there's got to be some work through it. And again, David, it's a case-by-case, project-by-project work through. There are some facilities that have gone to the extent to actually create facility standard documents, and some of them are very, very detailed and very, very glorious and bound and have pictures and photos and catalog cuts, and some are just plain text documents, and some are just kept and forwarded in emails. But there are some that are out there for us to use. So this was a particular project. I noted out all the different manufacturers, but you can see that I was told exactly what to use and who to use, and then on the right, they're telling me actual applications. In that procedure room, they like this type of door to be this type of size with this type of, finish and this type of hinge and this type of latch. So very, very, very specific in telling me what they want. And again, that comes from their experience and trial and error, and more than likely having things not go as they had hoped or expected, and making corrections to it and putting it on paper and making it official. So it, try to avoid it or at least risk manage it for the future. So this doesn't always happen. It doesn't always come to us that way, but it is optimal and ideal. And then we offer to help create those after a fact or after a job, so that we can put those in place for facilities, so they can use them for future projects. If we're setting a project now and we're putting in whatever products they are, this could be the new basis of standard for design. So we do offer those services for those types of documents. Security. So who owns security? Who tells who what to do? Who brings the device? Where is it specified? Challenges that we deal with every single day. And again, it's a project by project. It's a firm by firm. It's an owner by owner decision. There is no blanket answer to this, at least not today. There are trends. There are things happening. There are different ways that people go about it. But really, it's figuring out who the decision makers are and what the processes are for this project and working through them. Division 8 or 28 coordination. There's now the high-end electronic access control system hardware with integral readers and talking to software systems, and so there's a lot of crossover with who owns which type of device and where they go. And again, it's really talking it through, figuring out the channel, figuring out that process, and coordinating it through that particular project. I'm sure that those on the call must have come across 8 and 28 coordination issues and security issues. Who has the door contact? There's just so much that can go on with security. The locking and release device coordination as well. What type of devices? David, you mentioned, what if they tell you it has to be this type of device? Well, that might not be the facility standard, so we may have to look for something else, or go with another type of opening, or another type of system, or maybe we need to change some facility standards, because I doubt a facility is going to start to want to run on 2 different standards, so to speak. Power supply coordination, again, a big topic of coordination. Who's responsible for them? How many are required? When I specify, I'm putting 1 per device, but when it actually gets to the real world, once the electrician and security, everybody lays it out, there may be 1 device for 3 within a certain proximity. So all these things need to be coordinated and really written as such in the documentation, which we do, in order to make sure that it's coordinated properly. But these are all things, and players and people that have decisions that need to be part of the party. Because if we and all, you take liberties and just guess and put what we think, it very well might not be what that owner or user himself, that nurse on that floor or whoever, or that teacher is actually, experiencing the use. Operation narratives, very important. We put them on electronic and very difficult openings most of the time, but there's no reason why they really can't describe every type of opening operation. Just a quick sentence, something to, just make it clear what this door is supposed to do, rather than looking at model numbers, looking at lock function types, and figuring out what it's supposed to do. Just have a sentence or two, and everybody's pretty clear. This is what it's supposed to do. This is how it should operate. And then when we get to the field, hey, this is how it operates. And it's kind of like a handbook to guide you through from one to the end. Again, not done today, but it's maybe a better practice we can strive for the future.
Okay, we have a couple questions for you, Scott. Lewis, you want to manage the questions?
Okay. What are some of the best practices in terms of coordinating door hardware with electronic access control?
Well, I think the best practice is getting the security consultant, as I said, in the room with you and the design team and the owner, so that you can talk about each opening one-on-one, because, every door operates, every facility, everybody has a different way and opinion on how things are supposed to work. And if we're able to have that coordination meeting, we can talk about, differences in hardware, differences in keying, differences in application, and then come to an agreement and a decision, rather than going back and forth on email and on phones and going on for days, weeks, or months. I mean, having that coordination meeting is really the better or the best practice that I can think of to make sure that's done. And if you can't do it live, get on a WebEx. Have everybody on the WebEx. I've done many jobs that way where people are remotely all over. We all work remotely today, and there's no reason why it can't be done that way. But having the decision makers in the same room or on the same phone or in the same meeting at the same time, talking about the same thing.
I think an unspoken part of TJ's question is often many clients prefer to have a separate security consultant who's going to write a separate section for card readers and surveillance and access control and things like that. And I believe as we go along in the presentation that you're going to be covering some of that information about how to coordinate those things.
A little bit, yeah. I have an example on the plan that you saw yesterday, Louis, that we'll talk about. But I knew that was TJ, by the way. But yeah, it's give me a couple of slides and we'll talk about that. I think it's actually just one or two up. It is again. It's you can request it, you can ask for it, you can need what you want to need, but everybody has their own practices, and unless that owner who's writing the check tells everybody this is how it's going to be done, it's a struggle, project to project. So let me just finish up this slide, and I think we can talk a little bit more about what TJ brought up. So security, electronic access control, powertrain.
Some more questions. Yeah, Kevin Chavon asked, would end-user design standards be very valuable?
End-user design standards would be very valuable, yes.
And of course, larger institutional organizations, colleges, universities, hospitals, chains, and so forth often have formal written documents like that, but not everybody does. And part of the job of any consultant, whether it's the architect or the hardware consultant, is to prod owners into making those decisions if they haven't already made them. David Trudell asks the question, what are Scott's comments regarding the use of 080671 door hardware schedule for specifying hardware sets in coordination with section 087100 door hardware section? I think David's question is, do you sometimes assign a separate master format number to the schedule as such, rather than
so there is a section specifically for hardware sets in the format, and I personally have not and do not use it. But if an architect's system and their process requires, or that's what they do, then I wouldn't have any problems or issues using it. But everybody I've worked with and continue to work with has it in 087100, and that's where I continue to reference them.
Yeah, I would say we've only ever seen it at the front of Division 8 only once, and it's been recently, so I don't know if that'll be a new trend.
Yeah, but it's definitely a legitimate place to put them, and I would have no issues with them if that's what was requested of me.
Jessica Morrow asks, when a card reader is involved at Panic Hardware, who is typically responsible for connecting the power supply to the latch retraction, and how should that be indicated in contract specs?
Well, that's a good question. Typically, in my experience, the electrician makes all those connections, and that's not my experience, and that's not something that I have ever really focused on doing, but I'm pretty sure the electrician makes all connections, and he has to be union, and, da-da-da-da-da. It's a very clear and precise process, I think. David, maybe you know more about that than I do.
It's one of those spec items that we don't try to assign a responsibility in particular. So I have never done it myself or tried to assign it. So I don't know what the question might be, Jessica, if maybe you can follow up on that for a particular concern. I think Charles Beasley asks an excellent question. Do operation narratives in the spec trump errors in catalog numbers?
Well, I don't know that I can make that decision.
Well, yours are always perfect, right, Scott? So there's no problem there. So
they work, and I wouldn't be doing door hardware and
Yeah.
doing something else if I lived in the perfect world. But you know, I don't know. I mean, it really should only be in one place, right? Clear, correct, concise, complete in one place. So
Well, the problem
maybe that's
occurs
coordination I need to work on.
is that some of the hardware consultants that I've worked with, even though I have asked them, for example, to give generic descriptions of the lock functions in their hardware sets, instead I get, you know, a string of 8 or 9 alphanumeric characters, and that's hard to check when the submittals start coming in, to check to make sure that those are the correct operations. And using the generic descriptions, I mean, I don't care if they put the catalog number in there as long as the generic description's in there also. And maybe that's what Mike is after. I'm
Okay.
sorry. Yeah.
go ahead, Scott. We'll pick up with some more questions in a bit.
Awesome. So two more points of coordination: the power transfer device and the door position switch. You're really important points of coordination, because if we don't coordinate them properly, and the doors and frames aren't coordinated properly, and it's not prepared the way it's supposed to be, we could end up with something in the middle, surface mounted, rather than something nice and concealed on the left, or a door loop on the right instead of a concealed power transfer in our hinge. And so there's just different things that can help make our project better, more safe, more secure, and more aesthetically pleasing in some cases. And really just the better installation. I mean, you don't want to put things surface mounted if you don't have to. You want to hide things if you can. So coordination, and then I'll talk a little bit about details. And then the other switches are request to exit switches and latch monitor switches, all of which security is monitoring. So we just need to coordinate with them and make sure that somebody owns it and one person has it, and we don't have that overlap and lack of coordination. There's a rising pin there. Okay, so some more security, electrician, and code coordination, just to finish off the security section. Intrusion system coordination. I mean, I've had some intrusion systems that I've worked with on campuses and healthcare facilities, and abduction lockdown systems for child birth facilities. Man-trap coordination can be a big deal to some, and we just need to talk it out, figure it out, and coordinate it so that it's specified properly. I mean, I've just found if you spend the time right up front and just really take a few minutes, it's really eliminates problems in the end. I mean, it's really amazing what coordination will do for us. So you can see also voltage, current, function. I mean, all things that are very pertinent for the specs, and then of course having proper installation and functionality. So talking more about getting the information regarding security and really anything else. I mean, it really ideally could be on the plan, ideally on the architectural plan instead of a separate security plan that you have to flip back and forth from. I sometimes have to have 3 monitors open just to see a security plan, have the regular plan, and have my my spec documents open to work with, and it can be frustrating, a coordination nightmare, and you can make mistakes too. So I'm not really quite sure, as well as a lot of other things in door hardware, why it's done that way, but I have started to encourage people that I work with to have the door numbers overlaid, the architectural door numbers overlaid onto the security plans, and or the security devices overlaid onto the architectural plans. So I mean, I would encourage that. It'll eliminate, like I said, the manual transposition of the numbers, and trying to match things up, and it's we're all using the same data that way, and I think it's a lot cleaner and will avoid all that. David, to your point earlier about being told what to specify, so here's an example of a project where, healthcare, where they're telling me exit device with electric latch retraction and integral request to exit switch, but they're not telling me manufacturers or brands, so it's kind of a half tell there. Concealed door position switch, which is fine because they own that anyway. A request to exit switch, they want that as a sensor. I think it would be better, in the device. So, just little conflicts like that, and we really just open it up to communication. I let the architect know what we're thinking and why, and somebody makes that final decision down the road. But like I said, it's not really, there's no blanket answer to any of this stuff. It's a project by project, case by case, firm by firm kind of work through. But definitely getting those architectural door numbers is, I think, a big key to eliminating a lot of that confusion and transposing of data rather than using the same data.
Scott, we have a couple of questions specifically about electric hardware and connections. Rosa Cheney asks, why would you use an electric transfer hinge versus a separate electric power transfer?
Very good question. Some cases, some devices require a higher rush of voltage and amps going through there, so an actual electric transfer hinge won't handle that load. But nowadays, pretty much all manufacturing devices can go through a hinge. There are options and ways to do that. When you put the wires through the hinge, it's a very small area, and it's a very small wire, and it's very tedious. And, the hinge working back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. I mean, I haven't had many experiences. I can probably count them on half a hand as to where electric transfer hinges have failed, but it is a failure point where the power transfer, in my opinion, is a lot more meatier. It's in a protected, metal coil housing, and it just has a higher durability, I think, factor to it. So, I mean, in my opinion, the electric transfer is the better way to go as far as durability, but it's not very aesthetically pleasing. It's another prep on the door. It becomes more costly. It's more installation. So, there are different ways and reasons to want to choose one or the other. But my first choice would be an electric power transfer, separate.
And then Jessica Morrow has a bit of a horror story that perhaps you can comment on. She says that she has a recent project where they specified power supplies would be provided by the security contractor, but the security contractor said they'd never supply those. So in the end of the project, she says we're still arguing about whose scope the power supplies are in. The door installer ended up providing them, but wouldn't connect them to the panic bar, stating that is the security contractor scope. Security says they don't usually do that. Coordination nightmare. What's typical in the industry?
Again, I don't think there's really a typical. It depends on really what the decision makers in that room can want to decide together. Typically, a security consultant integrator wants to furnish them with their devices because that's what they know. That's what they do. It's tied in, but so are our locks. So it's a project-by-project, case-by-case coordination issue, but I would just encourage noting it in the sets, as it sounds like it was, that it's supplied by the security people, but it just needs to be cross-referenced and checked. I mean, if the security people has to be in their proposal or somewhere that they excluded it, or in their shop drawings it wasn't shown there or something, so it really it has to be picked up, but it's a major point of coordination, and I would just keep it at the top of your checklist as always checking on that and making sure somebody owns it, as well as the door contacts and some of the other items we have and we'll talk about. Noting it isn't always enough. I mean, sometimes you gotta take the next step, and it can be an expensive mistake. Any others, Lewis?
No. Why don't you go ahead?
So if we don't have that glorious, all-encompassing meeting with all the decision makers in the room, and even if we do, somewhere down the line it needs to become part of documentation so that we have a record copy, so that we know what we're working off of, and we can actually start to create our hardware sets. In some cases, I'll get piecemeal things, which is not optimal and not ideal, and after the first project of working with someone and getting piecemeal, I try to encourage them for the next projects to become more concise and complete, and the things that we're talking about today. But here's one example where the functionality of the doors came in bubbles pointed to each door, and each door didn't have door numbers. So it then became another cross-reference later on another plan with another plan, and then security was on another plan. So it takes so much time, and again, the efficiency and the errors that could be made by not having that information concise and correct in one place can really hurt the project. These on the right here, the coat hook and the protection bars, I found buried in a design drawing, in an interior design drawing somewhere for materials and such. So, again, it's you got to get all the information. We don't know where to look for it unless it's fed to us. So, having all this at our disposal is going to be ideal. You can see, in where I read highlighted clean and soiled utility room door protection, they're very clear, and in some of the others not as clear. But as much information as we can get is going to eliminate a lot of those coordination, troublesome punch list change orders and nightmares that we all seem to experience or have experienced. This is a door schedule. I like to get it in Excel also, in addition to your PDF plans. And ideally, I mean, having these comments in the remarks column, if we're doing this remotely, or if we can't have a coordination meeting together in a room, or if we can't get on a virtual, call together, this would be the second best way to get the information from the architect and owner. I still would much rather be on the phone and go over it together and even write this in myself if I could. But getting the information is very, very important, because again, I'll just say it for the last time. I can guess as to how an opening should work, but that user or the architect may have a different preference or experience with that. You may notice all those missing label, head, jam, detail information in the middle. You'd be surprised, or maybe not surprised, as to how often that happens, where it's just not there. But I'm given the plans and the door schedule and the information to write hardware sets. And wow, that becomes difficult. I mean, I see a door size. I can see it on the plan. I can maybe see what kind of function it is and which way it swings, and we can hang it, and we can. But looking at details is so important. And I know that you can all appreciate that. You all create those details and help specify those details and work with those details. So having these ready at the inception is so key to making this run smoothly. Door elevations, door frame elevations. I mean, something on here could just jump out at a consultant that does what we do every day. The bottom rail sizes, the stile and rail dimensions for fitting of a lock set, the top rail dimension for a closer, or recessed panel dimensions for whatever type of hardware might be fitting in there. Or there's just a lot of different things that can jump out at us and show that there could be a problem before we even get started. So we can start to discuss it. But once we start specifying and we start getting stuff on paper and we start going down the road of deliverables, and then this stuff starts to come out, details, and it really becomes a coordination issue, because you're going back, you're doing it 3 and 4 times, and we're definitely going to make mistakes. Here's one detail I came across. I spec'd the job, I wrote the job, I sent the job out, I went out to bid, and then the details came a week later, and there's a recess on my frame on 3 or 4 of the 30 openings, and I didn't know that because it wasn't there on my details, because I didn't have details. So that becomes very troublesome. A regular butt hinge, which was specified, that barrel will not fit in that corner, and it won't install. It just won't work. So that hinge can't be used anymore, and it's inexpensive, yes, but if you have a lot of them, it becomes costly and becomes more in the landfill and everything else we spoke about before, and more labor and so on and so forth, and just unnecessary nonsense that we absolutely could have avoided had we done it earlier and worked together. Here, just to show you how that barrel sits at the edge of the frame, and that there would be no way it would install where that trim pops out. There is a hinge that would work, though. It's the raised barrel hinge, and had I known that, had I had the detail, that hinge would have been specified originally. Instead, that was a change order, and it was paid for, and it was installed after the fact. So very, very key to our coordination are the details. Strike plates would be affected by that same detail. Right? My latch is now going to scrape that molding if I don't extend that strike, and I don't know to extend that strike if I don't have this detail. So again, detail, detail, detail. And the last part is of the door closer, also affected by that same little piece of trim there, right? That little shoe on that door closer needs 3/4 of an inch. I need to make sure it fits there. I need to make sure my arm is long enough to go into that reveal. I need to make sure, so we don't have the coordination nightmares at the end. Any questions on the details? Elevation detail would have prevented this. So we have our nice door closer sticking down into the recessed panel. There's a little stop built into the arm of the closer up there, you see. There are some manufacturers, every manufacturer can build a stop into the door closer arm. It has a limited opening ability. It doesn't go past like 110, so be careful if you wanted to go further than that. There is one manufacturer that I know of that has a stop in the arm on the pull side of the door, but only one. Everybody else's is on the push side. Okay, if I had these details with these frame moldings, I would have known not to put the closer there. Instead, these very expensive smoke detector closures came with that gold finish, and it was set up for the reveals, and they didn't want to pay restocking fees, I'm sure, and I'm just guessing here, but they just went ahead and cut out that molding, and look how wonderful that looks. So coordination, coordination, detail, detail. If we have the details, we can and will avoid this stuff. There's another detail where, all right, they have the right bracket. It's mounted securely. It looks, it's going to work. It's going to operate properly and function well, and will probably, last the lifetime it's supposed to. But why even need the bracket? If we saw the detail, we'd see the closure doesn't fit on that top transom rail there, and we would recommend that be extended and made a little bigger, or maybe we'll do something different for the closing or something else. There's no reason for these Band-Aids and these, miscoordination applications. This is an automatic operator, a low-energy automatic operator, which we would specify in the door hardware section 087100. There's some of the places that it would be recommended for applications for the low-energy type, because there is also a high-energy, which we'll show on the next slide. But high-energy, low-energy, you need the proper installation. Look at that operator hanging off the top of that frame. I mean, that frame is starting to rip off of that opening because of the tugging and the pulling and, the motor and all that. I mean, who approved that? Who specified that? Who installed that? And why is that like that? It just shouldn't be. And, my assumption is it just didn't have the information, they didn't have the details, and it just wasn't done properly from the get-go. And then high energy operators, you can see they both have different ANSI standards that they conform with, and they both have different recommended applications. High-speed operators, high-energy operators would be, hospital emergency room entrances, airports, operating rooms, large office buildings, or entrances to stores. This particular one is Westchester County Airport. The guardrails are on the other side of the door where the door swings to. You can see the safety sensors there on it, and they're typically in their own section and specified with their own requirements, and usually are also specified and bought out with service contracts because they are such a maintenance nightmare and so highly frequently used.
Hey, Scott, we have a question from Michael Pedersen. How would you deal with it when the architect does not provide door numbers or uses one number for multiple dissimilar doors?
It's a door type.
I would add, or what happens when the architect decides to change door numbers in the middle of the project?
So door types is what the first statement was, I believe, and that works for me as long as all the doors operate and swing the same way and do the same thing, because a door type may have one type of hardware set that a door swings in and hits a wall, and another door type A may swing out and not hit anything. You need an overhead type stop or something. So door types don't always work. They work better in, I'll say, like a hospitality type, guest room, because they're all the same and, they really don't change. But door numbers are really the better way to go, and I would talk to the architect and try to convince him and influence him to change the way he does it if I came across it that way. And David, what was the second? Oh, door numbers changed. I just did one this morning. 3 door numbers changed on a university project renovation I'm doing, and you try to deal with it as best you can on a small scale. On a larger scale, that's only happened to me once, and it wasn't a pleasant experience. And it's like really doing the project all over again, because you really can't cross-reference very easily when door schematics. I mean, they just really changed. They just didn't, skew. It was a totally different system. So it just becomes very, very cumbersome and troublesome and more costly to everyone because it's more time involved.
We had another question from Rosa Cheney asking, assuming you have room to put the closer body on either the door or the frame, and all else being equal, is it better to mount the closer body to the door or to the frame?
That's a really good question, and I probably never ever thought about it, and I probably should have read it somewhere, but I'm going to say the door. I mean, makes the most sense to me. Maybe TJ or Wendell or some other hardware expert on the line has a different opinion, but regular arm closers mounted on the door seem to be the most efficient type. They will have the strongest closing force and just seem to be the best way to get optimal, control of that opening. So on the door, I would say.
Well, one of our listeners here, David Barley, agrees with you wholeheartedly. And TJ says he would say it depends upon which way the door needs to swing.
Yeah, Yeah, because you don't want to put a closer on the, let's say public view side, and even if it is the most efficient way, you want to put it on the proper side of the door, not just the most efficient. So great comments. Thanks so much. Any other on the operators or anything? It's low energy operators we specify, we coordinate. High energy, all on its own, have their own consultants and totally separate from door hardware. But we should at least note it and reference it, and I make a hardware set for it, and I just coordinate and reference it to the other section. Last part of here of coordination is aluminum, storefront, and glass openings. That style and rail dimension becomes very, very, very important. So if we don't have these details, we can run into some major costly issues. That same university had a trouble a few years ago that I worked on, that I heard about after the fact. I wasn't part of it, but they missed the bottom rail accessibility, 10-inch smooth, which we'll talk about, and it cost them $1.2 million in replacement doors because it wasn't the proper smooth bottom surface that it should have been, and it was just missed, and the AHJ signed off on it, and so on and so forth, and then it got caught on it later. So having these, like I said, it just jumps out at us. This is what we do, this is what we know, and we can help prevent a lot of the nightmares, as was, I think Jessica mentioned earlier, that we all can experience out there. Accessibility clients, strike plate preparation on aluminum storefront frames we'll talk about, and continuous weather stripping. We'll touch on each of these, and should be coming to a close soon. So accessibility compliance, I'm going to read this just it's pretty clear. Door surfaces within 10 inches of the floor measured vertically shall be a smooth surface on the push side extending the full width of the door. That's pretty clear to me. 10 inches, bottom of the door, smooth. So this door here has a 3-inch, 4-inch bottom rail, has exit devices going down into the floor, and would nowhere near comply with that code, right? Accessibility code. That door doesn't comply, and we see that all the time. I see it every day of the week, even new installations. This door is an exception and does comply. Okay, look at the difference. This first one has a 90-degree cap on the bottom rail. This one has a 60-degree tapered cap. So exceptions, tempered glass doors without stiles and having a bottom rail or shoe with the top leading edge tapered at no less than 60s from horizontal is allowed. But the door can't have any stiles, only the bottom rail. So be very, very, very careful. Point in pointing this out is I've been doing a lot more of this, specifying a lot more of these, and working a lot more on glass doors every single day, and kind of owning that. And it really is a point of confusion out there. So just be very, very, very careful and make sure you've covered all your bases when it comes to this. Here we have, as you would call in the Olympics, the triple Lutz. We have a thumb turn, we have a 90-degree short cap, and we have pulls coming all the way down to the bottom. So 3 points of non-compliance right there on the same opening. And the premise here, why have that 10-inch smooth surface? Anyone other than a hardware person? So that a cane or a crutch or a wheelchair or somebody that's weak may get caught up in there and just can't pull themselves off and get unstuck, and they would get caught in the egress, in that emergency possibly, and block up the entrance for everybody else. So having a smooth surface, they would slide right off the bottom of that door and not get caught and be able to wrestle themselves free to get out as they would need to.
Scott, Charles Beasley asks, do you prefer all hardware to be specified in 08-7100 or to have the hardware on storefront doors supplied and installed by the storefront manufacturer / supplier?
I take ownership of it. I would much prefer to, because we can continue our design, we can continue our quality, our manufacturers, our standards. When an aluminum storefront person does it, they have their own standards and their own devices and the own things that they do as an everyday device. So we really need to kind of tell them what we want and have them adhere to it, because a lot of the time it's in both places and it wasn't taken out of the aluminum even though it was put into the hardware. So it really becomes a big point of coordination, Charles. But I would always put every piece of hardware in door hardware section if it were me, to remain controlled over your design. Otherwise you're going to get what they want to give you. Patch fittings. Just to point out, they don't comply. 10 inches across, that is not. 90-degree cap, only part of the door, so be very, very, very careful with your patch fittings. You still see these every day of the week on new construction. Aluminum storefront strike plates. This is strikeless plates, and this is just laziness. There's no reason for this to happen. I will guarantee you 100% of the time that your aluminum storefront specifications say that your strike plate should be tapped and drilled and have an actual strike plate there, and not to just cut a hole in the frame and have the latch into it. So every day of the week, I'm going to say 9 out of 10 times you'll see this. So don't accept it on your projects, and check your specs and make sure it's in there, because I'm sure that they are. It should look more something like this. Now, some are prettier than others. That red color, maybe somebody likes that color, but there are different ways to do it. But there's no reason to have raw cutouts, raw metal, and not have a finished opening like any other opening you would have. Continuous weather stripping. Again, 10 out of 10 times, check your specs. I'm sure it says continuous weather stripping 10 out of 10 times in your specification, but 8 or 7 out of 10 times you'll see that big space right there in the middle around the lock, because again, they were too lazy to route it around, or it just wasn't manufactured properly or the right way the first time. The one on the left it's a beautiful opening. The one on the middle looks like it was done from the factory, just a little older, and you can tell the one on the right was a patch fit, and it wasn't done properly on both sides, and it's different colors, and it's different materials, but they must have gotten a complaint, or maybe the person standing in there got 2 cold breezes coming through there, and then they patched it up and fixed it. But your spec says 100% continuous, so make sure that your job ends up that way. Some other things that we need to make sure that we get, while doing this, is the acoustical report. If there's an acoustician, if we have some high sensitive sound rooms. Is there an interior designer? I'm doing a casino project with 7 restaurants, and every restaurant has their own designer, and they all have their own set of drawings, within the project, which has its, 5,000 openings. So it's a lot of coordination can take place. And if you don't have that stuff up front, it becomes a nightmare trying to coordinate that stuff later on and later on. Now, typically the designer stuff does come later, and it always changes, and it always, has some kind of moving parts to it. But at least having the awareness of it and a placeholder for it and knowing that it's going to be different would be ideal. And again, in that comments or remarks section of your door schedule, just point it out to us. Let us know what's happening here so we can be cognizant of it and address it somehow. Otherwise, it becomes double work for everybody. And then hospitality, I just mentioned about restaurants, guest rooms, public spaces, and amenities, back of house. They all have different themes, different designs, different requirements of hardware, different types of hardware. So, getting all those decision makers in the room and figuring out. I'm doing another one out of the country now, where we were just in the room for 2 days and going door by door, and everything's different, and it's very, very cumbersome and overwhelming, but you got to put it in order somehow, and talking it through is really the optimal way to do that. Demountable partitions, they typically have their own unique hardware standards, as well as glass wall systems, sliding and swinging. And you guys, this is what you do, specify this stuff. You know that. It's sometimes, it doesn't match the building standards or the facility standards. So how do you work through that? I mean, we're asked for more and more smoke and fire-rated glass wall systems and partition systems, and there's very limited choices on that stuff, right? I mean, so it becomes more difficult, but as a hardware consultant, I address it. We mention it, we label it, we talk about it, even if it's by others, because we want to make sure somebody knows that somebody has to do something with it, and it's not us. So we're just letting you know. And then roof doors, another specialty. Depending on the occupancy and class type of the building, roof door functionality changes. So making sure we know that information, having the right occupancy and building class type, will help us specify the proper type of functionality when it comes to the roof. Deliverables. So we're making it here to the end. What do we need? What do we need to do? What do we need to talk about? How do we get all this information, that we just talked about over the last 50 minutes or so in order? Well, meetings, live or virtual, is number one. How many are we going to have? Not if we're going to have them. How many are we going to have? Are we going to have 1 live one, 2 live ones, 1 live one and a virtual, 3 virtuals? We got to have meetings. We can't not have meetings. So how many meetings are we going to have? Draft hardware sets. They will come to you. They'll have functionality. They'll have descriptions. They'll have door numbers. And then we just hammer through the door hardware sets and make sure the functionality matches what it is that we had discussed earlier, and everything is in order. Catalog cuts, store indexes, these are all things that we'll furnish back with the draft hardware set so that you can look it over, review it, make sure that everything is in order aesthetically, functionally, grade-wise, type-wise, that either we spoke about or that the architect or owner is making the decision on.
So, Scott, we have another comment from Ron Lincoln. Should a DHC be hired, maybe he means AHC, could be typo, be hired to review construction submittals for set C specs?
So yeah, so the system doesn't work, the process doesn't work if we don't follow all the way through. So you can see I even have them red highlighted at the bottom there. Substitution requests starts there. If you get substitution requests, please share them with your consultant, because how many times have you asked yourself, or maybe you just don't bother, is that really an equal? Is that really grade 1? Is that really the same function? Is that model number right? Is what's that suffix, that option, that prefix? So
Scott, I have a question. Are all grade 1 hardware really equal?
I'll come to that in a second. Let me finish my thought on the substitution stuff.
Okay.
So really reviewing that stuff and making sure we'll keep consistency in our project, keep the quality in our project, and stop, just poor applications and bad applications and things failing when they don't need to. And then coming back to submittals, it doesn't. If we don't look at the submittals, we don't know if things were substituted. We don't know if things were taken advantage of, or value engineered out, or just not proper. I just got a submittal where they put all types of hinges that shouldn't belong there and weren't in the spec and weren't approved equal, and we rejected them, and we're going to get the ones that we absolutely wanted to have, because that's what was bid on, that's what is being paid for, and that's what we should absolutely get. Okay, sorry, Lewis. What was your question?
My question was, are all hardware for lock sets in particular that are rated grade 1, are they really all equal, or are some more equal than others, so to speak? In the real world, unless we put them all side by side and cycle them over and over and over and see which one fell in front of us, we don't know unless we have other third-party testing to tell us. So some manufacturers go to the extent to test their products to go well over and above the minimum standards of a grade 1, so they can say that it is performing well up and above grade 1. But that costs money, and it costs fees, and it costs capital. So some manufacturers choose to meet the minimum standards and not test further. So on paper, there are manufacturers that show that they may be a better grade 1 or a longer lasting grade 1 than another. But real world, I'm not going to live 150 years and cycling locks and testing them myself, and I wouldn't know experiencing that firsthand. But on paper, yeah, there are locks that say that they will last and are longer, life cycles than some others. Scott, we're at the hour, so we really need to kind of
that was the last slide.
Okay. How about that? Good timing.
Next gift, which is, if we really do all these things, we can avoid, things like this. That's my kid's school on the left, where a handle's failing, which means the panic can fail in an emergency. And on the right, that's my kid's doctor's office. So if you got to pull a handle up, it means the other side, it may not pull down. And that's an egress door, a fire door. So, working together and doing all these things, I think we can really use the process, use the system, and specify better openings. So some key takeaways, I'll close it out right now. The 10 sequences of the format can be used as a checklist to specify optimal openings. Coordinated information can help to minimize opening punch lists and change orders, and always include a certified AHC on your project team, no matter who it is, where it is, or what it is. An expert that only does this for a living is only looking at this for a living. So it's a major focus, it's a major point of concentration, and I really believe it'll save you time and billable hours, because the time saved by the person who has the expertise in it, you can spend doing other things and get much more value for your time. So arkaSpecs, the last slide here, code-compliant door hardware designs, electronic hardware operation narratives, equal product and substitution analysis. So if you get those substitution requests, respond to requests for information, research innovative hardware applications. I mentioned some great little manufacturers out there that can make some really great custom hardware, final inspection and punch list reports, door hardware submittals, comments, third-party reviews. If you want to write it yourself, send it to me. I'll take a scope at it. Take me a few hours instead of several days or a week. If somebody else writes in it and you want a third-party review, again, take me a few hours instead of paying for the whole kit and caboodle. So happy to be a resource to you. Please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions or problems or troubles. I'm not going to nickel and dime you. I'm here to help. Please don't hesitate to send me any of your questions or anything that I might be able to help you through. David, thanks for the promo on my book. Wiley is my publisher. It was published last year. It took me 4 years. Every piece of hardware known to mankind is in there, except for the wrap plate, which I forgot, and I'll hopefully get in the next edition. But
so that'll be the addendum.
That'll be the addendum. It's based on the Door Hardware Institute sequence and format. So Chapter 1 is every hanging device. Chapter 2 is every securing device. It's in alphabetical order, has all the options, has all the finishes, has all the references for codes. I mean, it's a really great reference guide and handbook. So if you do buy it, let me know. I'll come and sign it. And I really, again, have loved the opportunity today. It's been a great pleasure, and I hope I was able to help some people in some way. So have a great rest of the day, and Happy New Year, everybody.
Well, thanks very much, Scott. Really appreciate you joining us today. Been very informative, and I can tell by the number of questions that we had today that you had everybody's attention. One thing, we don't have necessarily a program planned yet for next month. Louis and I are working on that. But there will be a follow-up for another discussion on door hardware, and we had several of our friends on today that are also hardware experts, and we'll be tapping into one of them to present some additional, more detailed dive into some of the individual hardware devices. So stay tuned for that. Louis, any final remarks?
No, just to remind folks that we want this to be your program, your discussion group, and so if you have ideas or questions about potential programs or things that you'd like to have discussed or things you'd rather not discuss, keep those cards and letters coming in, friends and neighbors.